So my name is Brenda. I'm one of the co-founders of Teller. But before that, I was actually an economist for the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I used to focus mainly on some of the PFEIs, some principal federal economic indicators, such as the employment numbers that you see come out every month, the producer price index, and the unemployment insurance claims that you see come out every week. And although I believe that the people at the Bureau are doing the best that they can with the data that they can collect and the methodology that they're allowed to use, I believe that we can make all of those statistics a lot better. Specifically, the one that I would like to focus first on improving upon is the CPI. And that's because the CPI is used so broadly that it affects everybody's lives so directly. But rarely do people make the connection between this random number that the government puts out every month and how it directly affects them. Some of the things that it is used for is just wage escalations. You guys might have some in your contracts, or you may not. Cost of living adjustments, adjustments to social programs, and changes in monetary policy. Monetary policy, whether or not you understand the CPI, it directly affects you, and it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, it affects you. Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the US, once said, "But in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." And I went ahead and corrected his that's the wrong correction area, but I corrected his sentence to be actually inflation. Because as we all know, if you have enough money in the US, you can very likely be able to find enough loopholes that you don't have to pay taxes. But no matter how rich or poor you are, you're gonna face inflation. It's just, it doesn't discriminate, basically. And the thing is that people rarely make that connection. They also rarely make the connection between what the CPI is, this measurement, and how politicized it has always been. From its inception, the very first time it was commissioned, it was in 1890, and it was 1891. It was commissioned because of the Tariff Act of 1890. And it was commissioned because Republicans and Democrats wanted to use these numbers on the next election cycle to talk bad about the other one, right? Like whoever made the big mistake of implementing these tariffs. And obviously, because they were focused on their voter base, the only people that the survey included was white guys that lived in the city. That's it. If you were a woman, if you were of any other race, you were not counted. You did not matter. You did not have a voting right anyway, right? So it was just not necessary in their minds. Then it took about 50 years for the government to finally say, hey, you know what, this doesn't actually represent the population of the US, so maybe we should include Black and Latino households in this survey. And they purposefully included them unrepresented, or not fully represented. So each one of those households represented a lot less than what a white household represented. And then it took another almost 30 years for the CPI to go through another revamp of, instead of them collecting a basket of goods that might be only goods that one specific group of people consumed, to a basket of goods. So now instead of just collecting bread and eggs, they're collecting everything that falls into the food category. And that helped alleviate this bias. That was in 1978. That was the last time the US updated their CPI methodology, their official CPI methodology. And the way that this has been created for the longest time is basically the government has this administrative data that they use as their universe. And from there, they take a representative sample of it so that they can estimate what the population value is. And then they take this sample. They also have an expenditure survey that they do every 3 to 4 years. And they use that expenditure survey to weigh each one of those categories so that they can create estimates out of it. And then they try to keep the phrase of ceteris paribus or all else equal. So they try to control for almost everything to able to extract just the price changes. So every month they collect information on the week of the 13th of the month, and they collect information from businesses and households, and they take it into the Bureau of Labor Statistics the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They give it to the analysts, and then the analysts do the best that they can with this data, the way that it is collected, and with the methodology they're allowed to use. They're not allowed to change the methodology by themselves. It's literally an act of Congress to change it. So it's not going to really change for a very long time. Currently, they publish 3 main CPI values, the CPI-U, which is it's the official value, and then the CPI-W, which only includes clerical workers and hourly wage employees. It doesn't include retirees or people that are unemployed. And then the CPI-U, which is the chain CPI-U. This methodology was introduced in 2002. To sort of address some of the criticisms for the CPI, but it is so politicized that they could not replace, even though it's better, or it's supposed to address the criticisms that everybody complains about, it could not replace the main CPI value that is actually mostly or more probably used for the majority of the decision making. But they at least added it, right? And I want to point out that the government doesn't actually pay to collect the data. Where they spend the money is basically when it comes in, how do you clean it up? How do you classify it? How do you aggregate it? Which aggregation is pretty simple because they don't really change it. But then they do spend a bunch of money on methodology research that never sees the light of day because it has to go through all of these politicians to be able to approve anything. Now, we have antitrust laws in the US that protect consumers against monopolies. So it only makes sense to me that we would create this separate verifiable economic measure to actually act as an oversight for governments and protect people from corrupt governments. I'm not saying all governments are corrupt, but there is a value of people having this alternative. Some examples of where this could have been useful was Argentina from 2007 to 2015. They openly admitted to manipulating their CPI values. Instead of reporting the whole value, they were reporting only a third of it. And one of the reasons that countries may want to do this is because when they go to the IMF or the World Bank to ask for loans, if they are seen as high risk, they have low purchasing power, then their lending rate is going to be a lot higher than a country that has a lower CPI. So there is this conflict of interest because they're producing the number, but they're also the ones mostly affected by any changes on it. Venezuela, most people would say it's a very corrupt government. They don't really trust any of the statistics. Zimbabwe in 2023, the new elected president, they decided to not use the new CPI methodology and stick to the old one for their decision making. I'd say that seems to be pretty politically driven, but these are just some examples of how this is much needed. The only things that I can say that Argentina and Venezuela, the really good things that came out of it was really good research by Alberto Cavallo and Manuel Bertolotto, where they actually recreated that period of time for them. And because of their research, they were able to find out that basically they were not manipulating the values at the microdata level, but rather like they would produce it all and then they be like, yeah, we're just reporting a third of it. And also, they found out, this was prior to COVID, they found out that there's very high correlation between online prices and local prices. Apparently, we're really good at, or companies are really good at making sure they do price discrimination on their markets. So that was great, right? Because now we can actually use those findings to use that same methodology by scraping a bunch of data and creating a similar measure. But even though we have all of these examples, most of the criticisms that you're going to see online and on the web, it's always going to be substitution bias, lack inclusion of items, and poor quality adjustments. And that's because, and I just want to talk about a little bit substitution bias. It basically means that so think about how it's used. And if I'm an employer and I'm told that, or we have a wage clause, escalation clause based on inflation, and I'm supposed to increase your pay at the end of the year based on this, well, you know what? If you're eating 20 grams of protein, I could argue that you're just as well off whether you're eating burgers or you're eating steak. And there was an actually really funny tweet last year specifically talking about that. Somebody was complaining, was like, it's not, my standard of living is different. A steak and a burger are not the same. But this is what substitution bias argues. It argues that because people tend to shift items in their basket of goods to whatever is cheaper within it, then you're just as better off. And that's one of the criticisms. But all of these criticisms basically stem from the fact that we're using a static basket of goods that was selected 3 to 4 years ago to keep track or to attempt to create an inflation value. The one thing that nobody really talks about is the conflict of interest of the government. I really have not seen any research on it. I rarely see, there are some paid services that create their own CPI values, but then again, you end up with a very similar product to what the government provides. The government is very open about their methodology, even when they've been super biased about how they've implemented it, but they don't and cannot disclose the underlying data because they actually provide anybody that gives them data a guarantee of confidentiality and that their data will only be used for statistical purposes. So what we need to do, and what I think decentralized systems can bring to the table, is actually making it possible for us to create a transparent, verifiable data, and also, obviously, we want to make sure that we have some sound methodology, but we have plenty of research that we can actually incorporate, that the government is going to take a long, long time before they can approve any of it. So the main goals, obviously, is going to be bringing in transparency, and for this, the actual technical, the actual smart contracts are very simple. They basically keep track of the decentralized storage addresses where the description of the CPI is, the methodology for outlier detection, for aggregation, and for price quality or for data quality are kept. And then all of these, and then obviously you need a very decentralized oracle, because the moment that these numbers start diverging and people start asking questions, that's when you run the risk of censorship. So obviously I'm using Teller for that, but the main purpose of this entire system is to encourage open peer review. Right now, we all basically depend on the government wanting to update their methodology, which obviously they haven't been wanting to since 1978. And there's a lot of research that goes in-house. I worked there for 7 years. I did a lot of research in it that never saw the light of day, like 3 years of research, and it was good job and nothing else. Nothing came out of it. So now with this open review system, we have the data, we have the methodology, and if anybody disagrees or thinks they can do it better, they can actually iterate on it and improve upon it without the political agendas having, say on what goes or what doesn't. And that allows us to basically, as a community, improve upon it. The main things that I think that we benefit from opening this up and that we can actually bring in efficiencies is the data collection, because we don't have to depend on the government approving our data scrapers. Just get them done, get as much data as we can. Also product classification, because the government spends so much money on analysts making sure that data is clean and that data is classified correctly. We can actually experiment with AI and make those processes a lot more efficient, and less human interaction will also lead to hopefully less cost and recreating this. And outlier detection, aggregation methodology that will eventually, even if you think about a lot of the times that people do research, it's not even, I mean, especially like academic research, you don't really get paid a lot, right? You probably get a grant and you're just happy you keep getting those grants. It's a lot of ego. But honestly, we can actually harness that into making our methodology better over time. And making it open makes us more agile than the government. We obviously have to keep some, or try to keep all else equal, so we have to make sure that we collect similar to the government, we have a schedule similar to the government so we can actually be comparable, but we can use better methods. We still have to face some collection challenges, just like any other survey. We also have some extra challenges because we don't have a universe of administrative data that we can use, or for randomly sampling or creating weights. So we can initially send this off by sort of using part of the government information. We also cannot collect taxes. I wish we could, and I guess, what was it? Guild Protocol was talking sort of like something like this for common goods, or for Ethereum devs at least. I know there's some other things out there, but ultimately incentives are something that is going to be difficult to do just because of the nature of what we're doing. But common goods can actually create the foundation for for much more of profitable goods. Like a CPI could create the foundation for for a stable coin, or even some prediction markets. Everybody loves to bet on those. We don't have universe data, but we have the ability to collect more and more data. The more data that you collect, the closer you are going to be to the population, and that can help a lot reduce any of that bias that you might be having. Incentives are a little bit more difficult to implement at the individual basis. So the way that they would be implemented, it would be at the whoever's creating those and maintaining those data scrapers, and that's because you don't want to introduce self-selection bias, where like if you collect this information, we'll give you $1 per price or whatever, then you're gonna get the part of the population and that probably needs the money, and you're only gonna get sample from the places where they actually go and transact. The way that I'm separating this is into 4 different categories of people that would be participating in the network, and the way that I'm structuring it is that they are not exclusive, but they can be, and that's just because I want to minimize the amount of specialization that is needed to be able to increase the amount of people that participate in the network. So for the data reporter, you need somebody to collect the data, and those collectors are basically the ones, could be the ones creating the actual data scrapers, the data aggregators, which should be sort of the easiest job because you already have the methodology, you just have to apply it. Data quality research, that is a lot more specialized, and that requires somebody that with statistical knowledge and economic, so they can do, this open peer review and iterate on the methodology. And then the data monitors, which actually, those are a little bit more difficult than just arguing that the data's wrong, because any data that collects millions of rows of data is going to have outliers, so there's got to be a threshold for those outliers, an allowable threshold. And then from that, you have to have a measure of quality, so that you can then reward these data collectors after the fact. So it works a little bit different than how you would do a lot of how crypto works, that they want an immediate reward because you have to wait for the data quality to be assessed. This goes into each one of the roles. I don't want to go through that because I don't have a lot of time. But mainly right now, what I'm focusing on is basically creating the proof of concept through the Big Mac index. The Big Mac index basically tracks prices of the Big Mac all around the world. And that's because the Big Mac is so standardized. It doesn't matter where you go, a Big Mac's going to taste like a Big Mac. And so McDonald's did a really good job at standardizing that, and they've been publishing this information on The Economist for a very long time. They're very open about their methodology. They don't have all of their microdata available, but this is the first of the proof of concepts that I'm doing. Right now, we're already working, we already did data scrapers, but we're also starting to play with AI to see how we can actually harness that, and instead of maintaining all of these data scrapers, because they can't change country to country. Then obviously the US CPI, which is a much bigger lift because it's a lot more data, and then hopefully eventually turning it into a global index, and applying better statistical methods to reference prices. So we can benefit, the government can benefit from crypto, but crypto can actually benefit from the statistical methods that exist out there to improve data. Since the majority of the hacks that happen out there, especially for oracles, are because of data, of the manipulation of the price of the asset, not the actual oracle. And with that, I ran out of time, so thank you guys for listening.
Fantastic, Brenda. Thank you so much. We have time for one question, maybe. Quick question from the audience. Is anyone? One there? Yeah.
Can you hold it? Okay. I have actually 2 points. What about the challenges with the tech?
Put it closer to the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. When you mention about the challenge with the governments or the politicians, it's more about the sovereignty issue. Relatively, the data are now, which you are mentioning, are more sensitive data of each and every country. So that would be an issue of sovereignty, because nowadays we are seeing a lot of countries fighting over this kind of issues. And also the tech companies, which have a huge marketplaces, which have data, which have a big data on their data centers, which they are selling. It's more a profitable area nowadays. I didn't see that you mentioned about the tech organizations, because they are now one of the main role players in this industry.
Yeah, so there's price stats, there's trueflation, there's a lot of companies that try to provide some CPI data, but they recreate basically what the government does, which is they have some portion of it behind a paywall, and so you cannot absolutely verify what they're doing. That I don't see it as a challenge, because I don't see this as a competitor to them. I see this as I see this as a common good. And in terms of like sovereignty and like dealing with governments, that's one of the reasons it has to be decentralized. Everything has to be kept on decentralized storage. It's because there is going to be that conflict. There is going to be these politicians that are going to say, no, this methodology does not make sense. This is not real, basically gaslight you, because they want to keep their own methodology and be able to control what people see. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm happy to talk about it later, because I know they're trying to get somebody else up here.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for your time and insights. Big round of applause.
Thank you.